Brought to you by Exabeam, I'm Steve Moore, and this is the new CISO. Evan, thank you so much for being here. This is now our second video podcast here, again in Fishers, thanks to Brad Smith and GuidePoint. I don't see Brad anymore, but we thank him for his hospitality, and we thank you for being a part of this. I know we're going to be a little intentionally vague, but who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name's Evan Ferree. I am the Staff Vice President and Business Information Security Officer at a Fortune 50 company here out of Indianapolis. I've been there for 11 years. I've had a variety of roles, primarily in SecOps and threat management, but I've recently moved into this new role as the BISO.
We're going to press on the BISO role pretty heavily in this because I don't think I've had anyone on the show in the role. So we're going to kind of dissect that and figure out, how you made it there and really what all that means. But before all of that, a little more about you, as we do on every show. How did you get your start in technology?
Not the traditional way or the way that people may be approaching it today. So I actually started in business school, believe it or not, and quickly decided as I was going through accounting and through some of those courses, it just wasn't me. It wasn't enough to keep me interested. So I was actually riding the bus at Indiana University, and I saw this poster that said, informatics, it's the new degree. And so I started to explore what that meant, and really what it is for me is a combination of computer science and business and communication. And so that's the degree that I went after, and it's enabled me to take a number of IT roles. I've always been in IT. I've always been in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, but I actually started in IT infrastructure and then accidentally moved into security.
How did you accidentally move into InfoSec?
So I was at a friend's house, and he had recently taken a cybersecurity opportunity and said, "Hey, you've got the skills, you've got the background, and you're exactly what we're looking for in this role that we're hiring. You should consider applying." So I had a lot of conversation with him. At the time, I was in consulting, and I was in another organization that had a slightly different, direction that they were going. And so I said, sure, I'll explore the opportunity, and interviewed for it. Had some, good conversation with the leader that was hiring, and ultimately, was selected and decided to take the leap into cyber.
So your friend said you were ideal, even without experience. What were the things that at that point in time, what did that person highlight in you that sort of gave you the confidence that, hey, I should go apply for this for a job that I've never done?
We were actually running vulnerability assessments in my consulting role, and we were taking Qualys reports, and we were taking reports from other tools, and I was on the infrastructure side, so my job was to read the Qualys report and read the vulnerability assessment, and then go make the changes within the IT system. And the opportunity that he was suggesting that I apply to was vulnerability management. He said, "You're really good at fixing the problem. Can we switch you to articulating what those risks are and working with someone in IT to then go perform remediation or put some type of mitigation in place?"
I like that. I think for those listening that are maybe not yet in information security, thinking about those points of connection. And so when you do interview, what's the input or output that you may be working on the other side of, and try to get that perspective and be able to show that then in the interview. Back a long time ago, I didn't work in InfoSec. I was a sysadmin and did DevOps and some other stuff. And the thing I had to go do is find sort of free tools or open source that had a crossover into, sort of the larger paid tools. And so then I could have the conversation at least. But you did it in another way where you found the complementary action of the correction side. So how long do you work as in vulnerability management after that change?
It was a short stint, about 6 months or so. The first job that I had in that role was to figure out how to expand that program into a different set of assets and a different operating system that was getting scoped into the program. So working through, a lot of project planning and initial scans, and just to get to that measurement of the problem and the order of magnitude, and how we then start to prioritize, just like you would with any vulnerability management program, was really what I was able to accomplish while I was a vulnerability management analyst.
So you're an analyst. What comes after that?
The B word, or the cybersecurity incident, had hit the organization at the time, and that kind of flipped everything that we were focused on, because we went from normal course of business and normal course of program building and maturity to how do we understand what this problem is and how do we contain it and where do we go from here?
So I'll ask the obvious question. I mean, if that's such a radical change, what career opportunity did that open up? So there's a crisis situation. There's a major incident. And again, like, not everyone's going to have this, but the teachable moment for me is that crisis almost always brings opportunity. And what you'll often see is when all hell's breaking loose, most people put their heads down.
Yep.
And I find it's the absolute greatest time to get ahead. Meaning you're not only learning in dog years, but there's so much to be done, and they need people to do, it's a way to up level skill, experience, sometimes level. So what changes with you during that breach?
I'll be honest. My first reaction was to put my head down and keep doing what I was doing. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting in a cubicle row in the office, and the leader at the time was walking up and down because he was trying to find airtime where he could have conversation and not be heard. And I think he had just hung up on a call, and I'm sitting there, and he walks past me, and then he literally reverses himself and goes, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I said, I didn't know the guy. I said, "I'm vulnerability management." He goes, "Oh no, what can you do right now?" And I said, "What do you need?"
Right.
And he goes, "I have a lot of work, follow me." And so that was really when I started to get involved, and that's what changed the responsibilities that I had in the organization, to really get involved in the team that was trying to understand the size and scope of the incident and where I could help. And so I put my hand up, very uncomfortable, not my native skill set, not what I had trained to do, but could follow instructions and had a lot of support to do a lot of, work that needed to be done that I wasn't necessarily hired to do, but I was capable of doing.
It's one of the things that I talk about most frequently. So in traveling all over the world, and my life has changed greatly since doing breach work as a core response individual, and now helping others with that problem, but in a different role, I think everybody needs to go through one really good one, sadly, as perverse as that sounds, because there's no real great way to synthesize it.
Yeah.
And the amount of experience and the type of experience you get is really immeasurable. And one of the best things is, it sounds a little silly, is silly things no longer matter, right? So, and you either add value or you don't.
Yep.
And it's not about what your title is or what your rank is or even your level of experience necessarily.
Yep.
It's who wants to get at it.
Yeah. Something you just said there is important, that like synthesized, opportunity to take a lot in and figure out what you could do to contribute. And I always say I got my MBA in cybersecurity in a matter of like 6 months, because we had to. We didn't have the staff. We didn't have people that were doing that, but we needed those roles filled. And so I was able to move from, an opportunity to do this project and then go do this work and then work alongside some leaders and really, really show myself, but also the organization, that I'm capable and I can provide value to this effort. And it was a defining moment for my career.
So when did you take your first formal leadership role?
So 10 years ago in June, actually. So I'm right on the anniversary right now of being 10 years in a leadership role. I started as a frontline manager And at the time, I think the organization, I'm going to say roughly 100. We've grown so much since then. So the first leadership role I had was building a team. I had one person that was kind of moved to me, and we had a bunch of open roles. So, buying technology, finding people that can support the technology, and also growing into that kind of frontline manager role at the time. I've taken a lot of progressive leadership roles since. I've served at director level. Now I'm at staff VP level, and just have kind of taken those risks when I wouldn't even say it's a risk, but being uncomfortable, and I'm really good at something, but I'm ready to take on the next challenge and kind of working my way through that process.
You mentioned risk, and then you backed off that word or that idea. Maybe it's not a risk, but what were you alluding to there?
Just that uncomfortableness of change, right? A lot of people get stuck in their career. A lot of people are like, I'm good where I'm at. And I've always had a curious nature to me and how I look at work and life and what success looks like and all those things. And so I really do think it's that opportunity, but with opportunity, you have to get uncomfortable, and you have to, take a risk, because you may make a decision in your career that doesn't pan out, and you've got to be able to live with that or make the change or grow into, whatever opportunity you've decided to take.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump a little bit into the BISO role. But before we get into that, I'll preface pretty much all that we're talking about here, just because of this interview is a little different. Not only is it live, but we're going to speak in general terms. So when I'm asking a question and when we're sort of mentioning a response, we're speaking just in general of what you know in the industry. I know you work with many other groups, other BISOs and other companies. And so I want to kind of frame this through that lens for several reasons, but mainly for those that are listening that are either thinking about becoming it or thinking about building that type of a program. What are the skills? What are the capabilities? What is it? How to frame it out? So I think what I want to lead with is, what's a leading indicator that you even need a BISO? Because not every company has that. And is there a mold for a size or a shape of a security program that needs this? And if yes, what is that thing?
Yeah. Typically, more often than not, a Fortune 100 company, maybe into the Fortune 500 companies, have explored the idea of a deputy CISO and then a BISO. And those are meant to be the right hand and complementary to the chief information security officer. And so I think that's kind of the industry or the size marker from an industry perspective. Typically healthcare, pharmaceutical, and finance, you see those with financial organizations actually more mature than others. So I think those are the triggers and touch points of when you might think about introducing that role. Where we're at, it was about 2 years ago, and we decided that's the direction we were going to take. And it was really meant to become that force multiplier, become that relationship management role to the business. There's some special projects, there's some nicheness in the role that really caters to the chief. And so, finding that balance and making sure that, you move into that role and you're successful is, still something I'm exploring and trying to figure out. But I think those are some of the core skill sets and triggers.
If I heard you correctly, is it in your lens interchangeable, like the deputy CISO and the BISO?
I think it depends. If there's a big enough organization where you can blend those two roles and you can say, we just have a BISO or we just have a deputy CISO, then it, you could see that role combined. Where I'm at, we don't have a deputy CISO. And so we've decided to go the BISO lens because we have business units within the larger organization that have unique security requirements. They have unique business models. They have unique problems. Not one of them is the same. And so while the CISO will maintain that aggregate enterprise view, this complements it within the business so we can see where we have pockets of risk, where we may have opportunities to push on different capabilities, support projects, understand business strategy, all of those things.
Once you decide to have that role, how do you defend having the role? Meaning, how is it to be validated, do you think, in your opinion, in general? And then what's the expected sort of outcome or measurement, the rubric, so to speak, of that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's subjective, but I'll throw a couple of ideas out there. Certainly data and measuring what that business information security office is doing, because it's not just one person, it's a collective, is helpful. And I think about things like, are we enabling product that is positioned to add to the bottom line of the company? Are we managing risk that is reducing the overall risk posture of the organization? Are we putting people in place where we may have, uniqueness from a day-to-day operations perspective? So I think that's one angle that you can look at the value here. I think the other angle is, are you able to force multiply the information security organization so that you can become more of a single voice or a single point of intake, or even, in some cases, the delegate for the leadership team, so that the business doesn't feel like they have to call 15 people to get something done.
Right.
They can go to one person that can then navigate the complexity of information security on their behalf. And I think if you find the balance in those two, you can defend the BISO model, the BISO role in an organization.
I think if you can align with helping the people that make money for the company,
Yep.
Said very plainly, one of the things I discovered is in several organizations, when you have a breach, business slows in many ways. And if you can help the people that make business get fast again, by either facilitating conversation, by helping them regain trust with customers.
Yep.
Then when I had discussions at higher levels, when I was pulled into difficult conversations, a lot of times I would lead with deals that we had just helped close as a product of having a relevant security team. We didn't have the BISO role where I was at the time, but having that as a facilitator to say, well, you know what, here's all the things we're doing, but by the way, here's the deals we helped close in the last, 30 days that there was a blocker, right? And being aligned with sales in that example, or the plan president, I should say. And it kind of, that alignment was very helpful. So being even more professional than that and having a designated role, I think, is very important.
Yeah. And speaking plain English, you said it best. Like, I've been in conversations this week where people are like, I need the non-technical version of what you're trying to communicate. And more often than not, I can communicate that pretty effectively because I've been in that business-centric role for a while and kind of know what the lingo is.
So here's a curveball. I would expect that the tone, so to speak, of this organization is heavily coupled to the personality of the executive leader of the program. Is that a fair statement?
I think it's a fair statement.
Well, there's a follow-on question.
Okay, so that's a fair statement.
So, well, I mean, let's phrase it this way. So if you are an extension of the chief information security officer, no matter where you work, there are certain elements of strategy that person has. There's certain goals and minimum expectations, and there's a way to justify you being an extension of that program, right? So you were an extended voice, you were aligned to the business. But as we well know, when changes like that happen, you have to, being an expert in this role, you're still figuring it out. You're relatively new to it, you said, but you have to work both sides.
Yeah.
So what are the things that you have to do that you've learned so far, right?
Yep.
What's the other side of that coin? You mentioned we were talking business and all that happy stuff, and that's good, being relevant. But then how do you also turn that around and be relevant to the executive that you're an extension of?
Yeah, you've got to find the right balance, because I can see some situations where you need to lean more into the business and some situations where you need to lean more into your own organization. And that's sometimes hard to do. But I also think in this role, you are 90% an influencer. And so where you can complement the CISO role is they're responsible and accountable. You're an influencer. You know the business, you know InfoSec, and you can play good cop, bad cop.
Right.
And you can use that to your advantage, especially in a large organization where there's multiple CIOs and there's multiple VPs, that you have to understand, the differences in their personality and the differences in how they operate and the differences in how they like to communicate.
A long time ago, I had a role where I was in charge of an architecture team, and the realization that I had, it's a fantastic job, and I had it for maybe about a year until things changed. But I realized that in that role, that 90% of my day was based on influence and not authority. And so you were always sort of trading and bartering ideas around, and they really didn't have to listen to you. I won't answer for you, but if you were answering, how do people, if you're working on influence, why do people listen to you, and why do they do the things why does a business unit agree with Evan?
Yeah. Because I think as you either take over a BISO role, you're building that program, there's a couple things that you have to do. And one of them that we haven't talked about is relationships and organizational awareness. And so I have the fortune of being at this organization for over 10 years, and I've got scar tissue in a lot of different areas, and I've built the relationships and rapport to have a conversation and say, look, it's an issue because of this, and it's important to you because it will affect the business and it will affect some of our external obligations that we may have and some of the laws that we have to uphold. And so I think you've got to really reframe, because every role's different. If I was in, threat management and doing cyber defense work, hey, there's an issue and you've got to fix this right now, and you kind of get instant credibility that way. In an influencer role, you have to say, and here's why it's important. You got to nail down the why.
Yeah, that I think is an interesting difference. I bet a lot of people move into that role and fail because of that key point.
Yeah.
Or they've had a role in information security where the outcome was more tangible, meaning you mentioned cyber defense operations, right? There's a very tangible outcome there. You and I have common experience there. But if you move to an influence role and it's a little more squishy,
yeah,
that could be a point of failure if you're don't have the right mindset going in.
Yeah.
So follow-on question, you have the benefit of being in this organization for 10 years-ish, a little more. Would it be, it's not really even a trick question, going into a BISO role cold in a new company has to be infinitely more difficult for the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I have an advantage of being in the organization, kind of knowing how to traverse it, who to call, what those relationships are. If I was approaching that role outside in, the strategy would have to be much different. I'd have to really put on a discovery mode of what are my stakeholders? What's the CISO want? What's the rest of the leadership team want? Where do I need to focus on building the skills that allow me to influence? Yeah. And then, start to work backwards, where I've kind of had the opposite in my role transfer, where I had those relationships and I knew I could influence. I have to figure out how to make sure that I know the right things that I need to influence and what the strategies are. So I think it's a combination of both of those, but I can imagine and I wouldn't say this distracts anybody from pursuing the role. It's a great role, but you just got to approach it differently, and you got to think about your 90 to 180 day onboarding strategy.
What's a better job, running a SOC or being a BISO?
Ooh. I don't know that I've been in the BISO role for long enough to know.
Diplomatic answer.
I will tell you, it has been for me personally, it's been a little bit of a shock to the system, because when you're in security ops, you're always on and you're always distracted and you're always getting phone calls and you're always trying to solve problems. Like there's hundreds of problems that need to be solved every single day. And in my new role, it's influence and strategy. Where do we go? What are we doing? What's important to us? What's the business planning? So they're just so totally different.
It's intentionally a little bit of a tricky question, because it's a very different, your measurement, the breakdown of your day is infinitely different.
100%.
And the conversations you're having, very different. In fact, I'd argue that leading cyber defense operations, you can certainly have high-level conversations, but it's generally when things break.
Yep. It's always reactive.
Generally with not always, but
Yeah, maybe not always.
But it's whereas the whole goal is to, you're not going to push out into the business area as often. Maybe during M&A, maybe these types of things, maybe post breach.
Yeah.
But in the role you're in, you're going to have higher level conversations by design.
Yeah. I'm a very career driven person, and I've got a lot of mentors, and I've got a lot of smart people that I call to advise me along the way. And one of the opportunities, or one of the needs that I had, was to think more strategic. And so for me to take that role, it wasn't just to move from cyber defense ops to the BISO role, but it also is allowing me to use skills that I have, but also create new skills and refine some of those skills, where when you're so tactical, you don't always get to be as strategic as you can in this opportunity. So that might be another lens for folks to think about that are listening to the podcast, is if you've been doing SecOps or vulnerability management or architecture, and you're looking at what your career looks like and how to be more well-rounded, thinking about a more strategic role is certainly an option. And that's kind of what I've pursued.
I think absolutely. So being able to be a better simplifier.
Yep.
Being able to even slow down your speech. Often technicians get moving pretty quickly.
Yep.
And their delivery. Understanding when you're working with non-technical folks, the value of the intonation and using, pausing, listening, pushing on certain questions, being able to read the room, body language, eye contact, eye movement, understanding all these things, right? Even ways to figure out how to lower if you're a nervous person, which I was for much of my life, still sometimes am, but how to control heart rate, how to understand how your body behaves in certain stressful situations, right? So there's a lot of things that happen with us, and we're being evaluated in a lot of ways that if we're not aware and we're bad at all those things, including the strategy and the security knowledge and being friendly, that you can quickly fail in a room. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have anybody that was sort of outlining those misses on my part, and sometimes we get lucky and we have somebody call that stuff out. But even just like intonation, that's one of the things I'll hit on here. If you go into a business meeting and you're just rattling off technical things and speaking quickly, you're going to fail fast. And so maybe to that end, you mentioned there's some things you're refining. Is there an example of a small thing that you have realized that you should get more comfortable with? You've been there 10 years, but you're meeting some new people probably, right? Is there a thing you're working on?
Yeah. I've recently kind of went on this roadshow of meeting executives, explaining what I do. And some of those go 35 minutes long on a 30-minute meeting. They're really interested, and they're really buying into the help and the support that you can offer them. So that's a good story. I've had a couple of stories where 5 minutes in, I haven't done enough to articulate who I am, what I do, and the value that I bring to that audience. And so intonation or just reading the room, I've actually chosen to end some of those conversations and try again. And so that's me not trying to stumble through words and figure out how do I struggle through this and convince the guy or the gal that I'm talking to. Rather, I'm just going to call spade a spade, and we're going to end the call, and I'll come back to you in a couple of weeks, and I'll refine the message and refine the approach that I've taken with you, because clearly it's not working.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like a really mature way of saying, being able to be comfortable saying, I don't know. A lot of people are afraid to say, I don't know. And this is a derivative of that, saying, well, I missed the mark. Was it the way you actually presented the information? Was it an early version where the deck wasn't as smooth as it should have been? Was it the way that did you not let them speak first? What do you think tripped that call up that caused you to have to just eject?
I have a very clear perspective there, because I think it was an assumption that they knew me because I'd been at the organization and they knew the role that I held and the organization that I was now responsible for. And the reality is I jumped into it and it's like, well, why are we even here? We have a CISO. Why I don't need to talk to you. And it's like, okay, I didn't take the time to educate up front to someone that I maybe didn't have the relationship.
Yeah, you leapt ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
And that might be the danger then too, that if the familiarity allows you some grace if they already know who you are and you're in this role. But if it's a stranger,
Yep.
right? And you leapt ahead, maybe you started in chapter 3 when,
That's right.
yeah, they needed the intro.
That's right.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a good point. Switching gears, we got a little more time. You recently did the CISO Academy. Deloitte put that on. You said it was excellent.
Yeah.
We didn't talk any more about that. Why was that excellent?
So yes, I recently attended a couple of days of like a CISO executive offsite at Deloitte University. And there was 30 other CISOs or, CISO equivalents that were there. And, to me, the value in the interesting part of that was obviously networking. So we're sitting in Fishers, Indiana today. Going to such an event, you get access and you get networking opportunities for leaders all over the country that are brought together as kind of top talent, I would say. So the networking was great. The programming was great because I don't think we talked about a single cybersecurity topic at depth. We talked about leadership and empathy and storytelling. There was a ton of focus on storytelling.
Tell me something about storytelling.
Oh, that's a whole nother topic. Yeah. So and it all goes back to what we talked about earlier. You have to craft your story to individual audience or preference. And there was this concept that they mentioned called log lines. I've never heard of this. I'm not a communications person, but the approach is if you're trying to present a complex topic or if you're trying to, just start a conversation, the log line is like Netflix, right? You have a picture of the title and then you have no more than 2 sentences. And that is your opportunity to take someone into the story and go a bit deeper. So it's kind of like your advertisement. So
Right.
It's really made me think about what are the log lines and how do we quickly get people's attention. And if you do grab their attention, then you start to go deeper. So I thought that was phenomenal conceptually on how that works and how you can strategize that in your own storytelling. So I got a lot out of that. There was a legal conversation around liability and what it takes to be a CISO and what some of those considerations are.
Individual.
Yeah. Yep. And so there was a topic there. And then we just rounded out with this was a 2-day opportunity to meet new people and build your network and expand your network. So it was phenomenal.
Who were the presenters? Are they all Deloitte people?
No. They brought in, and I don't remember their names, but there was 2 or 3 external speakers on, storytelling. There was a panel from a couple of law firms. And then, they brought in actual CISOs that are in very large companies. And we got to kind of pick their brain, if you will, on same thing we're talking about. How did you get there? What are the things that are important to you? And so it was pretty well rounded from a 2-day programming perspective.
So if you couldn't work in a SOC again, and for whatever reason you could no longer be a BISO or a CISO, what would you do?
This is going to sound silly, but I would probably find some type of hospitality role. I won't say the hotel chain, but I worked for a hotel chain for 3 years and I rotated through the front desk. I've made hotel beds. I've greeted people in different languages that I couldn't speak to. I've answered the phone. I worked overnight. I've parked cars. I've done every job in a place. I loved it. It just doesn't pay. And so if I could go back to it, it's customer facing. I happen to work in a very, very high end, hotel where we were able to incentivize and answer the customers' complaints pretty quickly. And you got to see a transient, population of people coming in from all over the world for whatever reason. And you really do in that situation become their extended family when you work in such a luxury property. So if I could do it all over again, I'd go back.
I don't have an answer that's as good as that, but I've really enjoyed one of my first jobs after I left the farm and stopped doing construction work. I worked at a hardware store, and I absolutely loved it. It was an amazing job, solving problems for people, helping people out, the customer service element to it. It didn't pay anything either, but it was a ton of fun.
Yeah. Camaraderie. Like
Yeah.
you meet, I've got some of my best friends are from that role. So it's a different, hospitality is just different.
Before we ask if the crowd has any questions, I've never done this. Do you have a question for me?
So I actually, I'll ask you this question on repeat to see how you answer it now.
Sure.
I recently called Steve, and said, "Hey, I have an opportunity to sell my role and to sell what I do to, some folks that are asking what a BISO role is."
Right.
And I've incorporated some of those into the way I think and the way I'm operating. But how would you answer that question today if I was to put you in the hot seat?
Yeah. So how would to clarify, how would I answer, knowing what I've learned from this conversation? Like, how would I answer?
From your exposure in the tech world, in the industry.
Yeah. Look, I think that you have to center around the idea of why is there such a thing? Purpose of direction. My father was always big on that. Why in the hell are we waking up in the morning? We have a thing called the BISO. What does it do? Why is it necessary? Are we filling a deficit? Are we allowing for scale? Are we looking for that hotel example where we have another level of service? And then how do we measure that in a way that can make sense to not technical people, but non-technical people? Doesn't matter in this example what the tech people necessarily think of the role, because there's other technical measures. But then we also have to be very quick, back to earlier points. Maybe there's a regime change. Maybe there's an M&A thing. Maybe executive leaves. And so you have to be very quickly to say, if somebody asks you, well, should we have this role? Is this role valuable? You have to be quickly ready to articulate value, but just as quickly be able to say, but it may not be right for us to do it now.
Yep.
We may be going through a transition period where we fold this role into another task. So let's focus on what are our priorities in the next, right? When there's a time of change, steady water makes sense. Time of change, maybe we retrofit. So you have to think about, if you're going to build a program, what are the ways that I can retrofit and fall back and take another role? So, okay, this mission, maybe not as important. Maybe business line is less important for a moment. Is there a role for the BISO in M&A, as an example? What's the role during crisis or change or transformation or breach? So I would outline all of that and say, okay, here's how we play into these roles. And by the way, here's the baseball card of the individual who fills this role best. And you have, I would outline the experience level to say, my majors are this, my minors are this, right? Deep experience here, secondary experience here. And so I'm this executive utility player. And here's what we can do, right? So if I were going to outline those, features and benefits, that's the kind of thing that I would focus in on, because you can't count on status quo. And a new leader may come in and say, I don't need any of that. And you say, yep, I agree. But here's what you do need, right? Your next 6 months is a reset. Here's how this group, I agree. Let's change our mission for the next 6 months. And it's not an or, it's an and. And that way you don't get, socked in the nose, from a career perspective. Right. So how'd I do?
No, you did well. And it goes back to what I said earlier. The role is largely somewhat catered to the CISO, but it also has a very important role in large enterprises that are very complex and deep and wide.
Yeah.
So being able, I like the way you phrase that executive utility player, because I find myself doing that quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coverage when it's needed, right? There ought to be a succession planning message in there. There ought to be some other things that happen. Certainly continuity of operations and all that goodness. So Any questions from the folks that are here? You're still here. So for those listening, the question and the point that was brought up is Evan's executive presence. Maybe something you have to work on over time. You might not have had it always, has an abundance now. How is that? How do you grow that? How do you recognize it? How do you deploy it?
Yeah, I'll give you 3 of my pointers. I think the first thing is to surround yourself by other people that are in that role or exude that presence and emulate. Like that's an easy thing to do to build your executive presence. I think the second thing, and it's the gentleman sitting next to you, Brian Quick, had this concept of commander's intent. And so I think if you approach any conversation with the mindset of commander's intent, you really do kind of hone people into what the message is that you're sharing and what the need is that you have in conversation. And so I've always kind of leaned into that kind of commander's intent mindset. And I think the third thing is failure and learning from failure. Like the conversation I mentioned earlier, I've talked to the CEO of lots of companies, and sometimes I'm like, I need to come back to you. So just being more self-aware and having humility and having a little bit of savviness in you. You got to read the room sometimes. So those are 3 things that I've used not in the past, but today.
Quick note on commander's intent. So the notion is for decentralized chain of command, if you have an individual, you know what the commander wants and the expectations, even if you're not able to communicate with that individual, like a high-stress room, you have a general idea of what commander might want and the mission is and expectations. So whether that means to take a slightly different direction, be able to make a decision, a choice. So it's keenly important. And I think understanding that, not just what the commander wants, but at multiple levels, that's how you have a successful organization. So understanding, what are the expectations? Where are we going? What's our strategy? And what does the boss want? And especially in the role you're in. Yeah, good point. Any learnings of how to contribute best back to the security community, either through the Deloitte Academy or otherwise?
There's no right or wrong answer here, but I think from a CISO lens or even just an executive leadership lens, the amount of technical give back that you can give diminishes as you rise in leadership or rise in the organization. So I tend to focus less on trying to convince someone how to patch, but the reasons why you should patch. So just that kind of soft skill leadership is one that I think any executive can pass on to, the organization. The other thing is we're just going through this interesting economic time, and I'd say we're still post-pandemic. And so empathy keeps coming up, and you can try and be empathetic in anything you do, whether it's in the business world, in your personal world, or with a team that you lead, but continuing to focus on empathy continues to be a theme. And then the final thing I'll say is, and it goes back to the kind of the tactical versus strategic. I like to focus on bringing people in that have soft skills and that teaching cybersecurity. I've had the best and absolute most successful hires with people that did not come from a cybersecurity background.
Absolutely. That's an important thing to push on, to be creative on where you pull talent from is one of the, and have a knack for where you want to go to pull from, have that sort of that conscript pipeline, so to speak, right? Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you for the questions and the attention. And thank you, sir, for being number two or 1, depending on how you count. But thank you for being here. Appreciate all the advice and leadership. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. That's it for this episode of the new CISO. Thank you for listening. Check out more episodes on exabeam.com/podcast. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe to get brand new episodes first.